Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 355. What if artists ran the show? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we are going to do a deep dive into a really exciting and interesting new project called Ayin Press. But what we're really excited about in talking to the leaders of Ayin Press is this idea that artists can have a more significant role in imagining a different and new Jewish future. And Ayin Press is the kind of project that we think is part of that work. We're going to get into all of it. Before we do, we actually are putting together a little bit of a Hanukkah gift store, including links where you can purchase some really awesome stuff created by some of our favorite artistic guests here on Judaism Unbound. Our gift guide also includes books that were written by some of our recent guests that are awesome. We think a lot of this stuff makes great Hanukkah gifts. And there's no financial benefit to us. All the money goes directly to the people who create this art, or at least their publishers. None of it goes to us. So check it out at judaismunbound.com/Hanukkah. And the one thing that you'll find there that does give us some financial benefit is that we're also making available gift cards, or they're not really cards, you just print them out, but basically gift cards that you can use to buy Judaism Unbound merch or to buy Yeshiva classes for the people in your life. And by the way, our Yeshiva mini courses, which are going on right now, they've all already started. They've had their first class already, but you can still register because you can take those classes asynchronously, meaning you can catch up on the videos and then join the class live or just watch the videos. So go to judaismunbound.com/classes to sign up for an Yeshiva class. If you meant to and forgot, you still can. So now let's get into our conversation with the creators and leaders of Ayin Press, which is an artist-run publishing platform and production studio rooted in Jewish culture and emanating outward. Both online and in print, Ayin Press seeks to celebrate artists and thinkers at the margins and explore the growing edges of collective consciousness through a diverse range of interdisciplinary, multimedia, and experimental works and projects, including poetry, essays, fiction, theory, conceptual projects, digital works, immersive events, and online programming. It's a lot, and we're going to talk about it all. Ayin Press was founded on a deep belief in the power of culture and creativity to heal, transform, and uplift the world we share and build together. We have 3 guests today. Our first guest, Tom Haviv, is the publisher and creative director of Ayin Press. He is a writer and artist, the author of a book of poetry called Flag of No Nation, and also of a children's book entitled Woven. Tom Haviv is also the founder of the Hamsa Flag Project. Our second guest, Eden Perlstein, is the publisher and editor of Ayin Press. He is a poet, performer, and educator who has produced numerous albums of original music, toured internationally, and directed multiple music videos with Darshan, E-Prime, The Eccentrics, Ruthless Cosmopolitans, and Saints of Everyday Failures. Eden Perlstein has helped develop, co-write, and edit upwards of 40 books focused primarily on contemporary Jewish spirituality. He is the author and co-curator of the chapbook and gallery show In Flux on influence, inspiration, transmission, and transformation. And his debut book of poetry, Nothing is for Everyone, is due to be published in 2023. Penina Eilberg-Schwartz is a writer and editor who serves as the managing editor of Ayin Press. With her partner, Marty Pignol, she is the co-author of the chapbook Everything in the Speaking of It. And her first full-length work, In This Place Together, is a literary book about joint nonviolence and imagination in Palestine-Israel told through the story of Palestinian activist Suleiman Khatib. So let's talk about what an artist-driven press is like, and perhaps what an artist-driven world would be like. Tom Haviv, Eden Perlstein, Penina Eilberg-Schwartz, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
So I have a question about the name of your organization, but Lex is about to turn white because he's so desperate to ask you about the Ayin part of your name. That's not what I want to ask you about in terms of the name of Ayin Press. I'm actually more interested in the press part of the name. And when I heard that, oh, there's this thing called Ayin Press, I was like, oh, love to see what books they're publishing. And I hop on your website, and it's just so much more than that. And partly I felt like I was in a salon. Partly I felt like I was in a experimental laboratory of all kinds of things that one could create. And so I'm curious about why you're calling it a press, but I'm also more curious more broadly, what is Ayin Press as you understand it to be? What are you trying to build?
Yeah, so it's what are we trying to build with Ayin Press? I think the core practice is book publishing and digital publishing. The book publishing is dedicated to 3 editorial domains. One category is what we're calling speculative theology, which is basically our kind of code word for emergent Jewish theology, spirituality, interventions in text, interventions in tradition and ritual practice. Basically a space for people who are coming from the margins, and we're trying to bring those into kind of like these traditional forms, the book, the edited, legible, digital piece, et cetera. And then we're also looking at, so moving from the simplified version of that is spirituality. Then we're interested in publishing on what we're calling political imagination, which is our version of saying politics, but it's saying we publish on politics and history. We can return to that. And the last is what we called radical aesthetics, which is basically the fulcrum of the press, which is literature and art and imagination as kind of the source. And I think that the way that it moves backwards from that is to the beginning of our project. It's artist driven, it's artist run, it's artist created, and it's for artists and people who are creatively engaging with their fields, scholars, thinkers. It started with me and Eden, and Penina came on board, and we're growing this really exciting masthead and team and community of writers and artists. And on a simpler level, it's like we really care about the form of, we care about aesthetics, design, Jewish culture, and thought positioned in a wider, even like consumer market or readership where people don't expect to see serious Jewish spiritual production. They don't expect to see it in certain spaces and with certain kinds of aesthetic treatment. And that could sound superficial, but there's a lot there that goes into the kind of spiritual practice and creative practice to what we're doing. So digital and books, that's the book side. The digital side supports that, but we can go into that later.
Yeah, I think why we call it a press when you go to the website and you see the beginning of a book's catalog and a pretty exploded digital menu of multimedia works. That just goes into that question of what is a publishing practice in the contemporary age. That question has been really actively interrogated and experimented with, and there's lots of, quote, presses that are only digital. For instance, now lots of publishing practices, all they publish is online. A lot of osmosis going on between forms. And the idea of a publisher only publishing books now, or even only publishing text, that's a position that somebody can hold and a commitment that somebody can have. Certainly, we're a bit more multimedial, but we do still share a deep commitment to the form of the book and the materiality of the book and the reading, embodied experience of reading and all of that kind of stuff, and are also heavily engaged in digital art and media space. And I think for one thing that's really exciting, for instance, currently we have an annual journal. If that was in print, it would mostly be text and still images. Because it's an online journal, we can publish poetry with animation, with performance, and the idea of what is a text gets problematized and totally dimensionalized and expanded and fractalized in a really exciting and creative way. So now a publisher in our position is able to deal both with the materiality of the classical book form as well as a hyper expanded multimedial field of expression.
So, Penina, I want to gear a question to you because on our show, and I think generally, we tend, when we're talking about a new or new-ish organization to presume that the founders of that organization are the best ones to say what it is, right? And like, by the way, with Judaism Unbound, like somebody might assume that Dan and I are the best ones to talk about what Judaism Unbound is. But I often think it is specifically Dafka, it is precisely those people that did not create the thing that have a better ability to perceive it. I also think that's true of art, by the way. I don't know that the artist has a monopoly or a primary right to what art means. But Penina, I'm curious to hear from you. Like, what's your answer to what is Ayin Press? How would you describe it, having not been there when, you know, the name was decided and the original bit was launched?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, I just want to say, I think it has to do with what we were just talking about with what the nature of publishing is. I mean, what's beautiful about publishing as creative practice is the way that so many hands and voices and sensibilities touch it, and not just the artist whose work you're engaging with immediately, but the resonances that it creates, you know, in relationship to the other pieces that are on the page. And I think there's something similar here. But what is Ayin to me? I can answer by just talking about sort of what I felt when I encountered it for the first time, which was just a sort of sense of stunnedness and a sense, I think about it sometimes as if my breath had been taken away, although luckily my breath was not taken away. But I think what we mean when we say that is that something forces us to stop and to reconsider, which is what we hope art does and what we hope Ayin does. What I encountered in Ayin the first time that we're continuing to build and grow and expand upon was a place where really boundary pushing Jewish art had a place to stay in a lasting way that allowed it to interact with other works. And there's a sense of the radical nature of the political and the spiritual and the artistic being in the same place. You know, there's so much siloing of those conversations, I think more broadly, but certainly in the Jewish community. And there's really liberatory and essential potential of the way that those conversations meet. There was the sense that, you know, art and literature was at the center of it, that it was the organizing principle of everything. So even when there are different kinds of work on the page, all of it is, you know, animated by art and artistic principles and orientations. And there was a sense of slowness and imagination and an orientation towards the future that felt to me deeply healing in the context of discourse in the Jewish community, and again, more broadly. Ayin, to me, is a publisher that's expanding the nature of what constitutes a Jewish conversation. It's contributing to lots of important work that's happening, but bringing different modes and registers of speech that we can use to express ourselves, to gesture towards the meanings of the conversations that are crucial in our community and in our world.
Okay, so I don't know how many funders you've talked to yet, but I think like if I was one of them, one could interpret this question as a version of, well, what's the gap in the market that we're seeing that requires this kind of organization? But I don't really think that that's how artists think and talk, and that's why I really don't want to ask it that way. I want to really understand more just when you think about what is it that an artist-driven publishing platform, how would that be different from, let's say, all the other publishing platforms that are not driven by artists? What is the role of artists and the way that artists think in society, and how is that role missing in Jewish society? So when you talk about political imagination, when you talk about speculative theology as opposed to politics and theology, how is that something that will drive the process of Judaism becoming better forward in a way that would not be possible if we didn't have this platform driven by artists on those kinds of topics?
As an artist who had and has a career both outside the Jewish market as well as within the Jewish market, I always experienced a tension of coming into Jewish spaces as an artist and feeling not supported. I always had the feeling of my work needing to serve some other function than actually its primary orientation. It always felt like some sort of translation project to translate my artistic practice into a rabbinic space, into an academic space, into a different kind of communal space. So that was one thing. Now, in an opposite direction, oftentimes as a Jewish artist within art spaces, I would similarly have that kind of depositioned experience as well. And in certain kinds of art spaces, it's like you can, don't mention God. Creating a home, a platform, a production studio and place that foregrounds the experience and sensibilities of the artist in a way that's legible and understood in the guts of the production processes is hopefully something that we're providing for other artists in a place where they're like, oh, actually, this feels like a home. Yes, there's translation work, there's explication work that has to be done with every work of art for sure, but in the actual production, in the presentation, in the caring and nurturing and development of the thing, for a place where artists feel supported and seen for the work that they're doing is an experience that I, as an artist, yearn for, and we want to provide for other artists. I do also think that in the general terrain and field of Jewish publishing and thought, obviously, rabbinic-led initiatives are heavily funded and supported. Scholarly-led initiatives are heavily funded and supported. All of those realms and professions have built-in assumptions, epistemological programs that they're running, privileged forms of discourse, all of which are totally credible, viable, useful, necessary. And from an artistic perspective, it's not monolithic, obviously, but there are, you can bundle together some sort of general principles that might enter into an artist-led or driven space. And I think those particularly come up in our framing of our three pillars. Instead of saying politics, we say political imagination. There's a lot of work being done to critically analyze history. That work is very, very, very supported in a number of different institutions and areas of discourse. We want to expand. What happens when we think about the political, not purely from that critical historiological perspective? Let's open up Pandora's box. Let's, put the top down on the convertible. What happens when we allow and invoke imagination into that realm? Similarly with theology, it's not an academic exercise in figuring out, quote, what the wisdom holders and their texts were actually saying in the historical context. This is not biblical criticism. We're into speculative theology. What were they saying that they didn't know they were saying? What are we saying? What would we say given certain circumstances? But I think from our sensibility as artists, opening up to imagination is, a primary orientation of the project.
Can you say more about, just for listeners who, we've been talking about the importance of artists and art for a long time, but I still have this nagging feeling that I can't quite articulate why. What is it? You said, Eden, that there are all these projects that are funded, rabbinic-led projects, academic-led projects, but not enough artist-led projects on a set of topics. Like, what is it that artists do that is critical for society that those others don't do?
There are people who are committed to not knowing and to making not knowing actionable and useful. And I think artists, the idea of an artist-driven press, if that's what you're really asking, like, why does that phrase matter? Is I think that we want to hold potentiality and possibility and what we haven't seen in the prophetic. There's a million ways that people have labeled this as a part of our publishing practice and a part of our Jewish practice, in that we're deeply connected to tradition and and ancestral and ancient lineages, and the accumulation of text and the body of work of the Jewish people and their friends, and
enemies
and frenemies, and also there's a kind of caretaking that happens when you have a creative practice where you're allowing guests and other spirits and other possibilities that you're basically kind of in contemporary parlance is like holding space for what can come through and what is possible that has not come yet, because we don't have all that we need yet. But we want to be to hold a space for what was in not so fixed a way, that we also open up what could be speculations of other possible forms we haven't seen, other possible political forms, other possible ways of practicing. It's kind of a tending of the future and the past in a way that's sort of a looser hold. And I think that looseness is also part of like why you're looking at the website and you're like, baby press is a bad word for this. You're like, this is like a circus. No, this is like, and whatever, we can go into the circus as well, because that's actually not one of our, it's not on our, we're not censoring that term. That term is valid for and operable for us.
I like circus.
Yeah, I like circus too. The carnivalesque. I think an important commitment, aesthetically, philosophically, spiritually, politically, especially, is the commitment to complexity and not to a fixed outcome. I think a lot of Jewish art and creative practice is overdetermined. I mean, maybe it's in a Zionist context, maybe it's in a certain kind of reform. There's all these sorts of metastructures that make the expectation of a certain product could be forced. And that's kind of the death of this expanded sense. And as a stance and as a resistance to closing any conversation, finally. We're working with scholars, major scholars, and they're bringing work to us that is different from their practice, their regular practice, and they're getting space that they wouldn't have from an academic publisher, because it's a different kind of audience, and we're different kind of editorial team and production house. So we're able to take things in a way that's more unexpected. There's another vector of possibility that we offer, not in lieu of, but in addition to.
Yeah, I think one reason we need art and artists and publishers who are approaching publishing as artists is because a lot of our conversations have stuckness in them, and we desperately need more and more and always more ways to express things, because we need to change our minds, we need to be moved into action, we need to continually exercise our empathy. We need to learn continually and keep always finding new ways to be in solidarity with each other as Jews, with non-Jews, with the non-human world that we're a part of. And when we get stuck in certain modes of expression, again, many modes of expression are needed. When art is missing, there's a crucial ingredient missing to be able to imagine the future and then find ways to enact it. There are many reasons why there's not enough of it, I think, in the world and also in the Jewish community. But there are political, traumatic reasons why there's not been enough space made for creative expression in our community. And when it is allowed, it's, people are trying to mold it towards certain purposes, and it needs space because that space is transformative and in service of figuring out how to be better humans to each other and to ourselves and to the world.
What you said, Eden, about how in spaces, I don't know if you use the phrasing of like Jewish art spaces, like where you're in an environment channeling Jewish art in some way. It's not one of the environments that's across all religious backgrounds. It's sort of focusing on Jewish art, that you felt the art was being instrumentalized towards something else. Like it wasn't being if I'm understanding you correctly, that it was being not treated as having sort of necessarily inherent value, but most of its value is that it could lead, I'm going to say, to mixed dancing. That's like the classic, like it could lead to something else. And I firmly agree with you. You and I recently reconnected at this Art and Artists conference, and my little spiel was art is not a gateway drug. That's what I called it. I've gotten fed up with how art gets discussed in Jewish life. Like, there's all these questions of Jewish artists and Jewish art creating organizations, and they all boil down to like, well, how is this going to lead to Jews doing more Jewish holidays, going to services more, being a member of Jewish institutions? Like, I reversed it sometimes, and this is what I did at that conference. I like to ask people, what if you had as a gateway drug question for synagogues, like, why are you having services? Like, does that lead to the creation of art? I actually think there are synagogue services that lead to the creation of great art. I think there are also synagogue services that don't really. And if that question were one that we lobbed at people leading synagogue services, I think it'd be productive because we'd shift the way services look to better lead to the creation of art. But we somehow only ask that of the art people. Like, well, how does the art that you're creating lead ultimately to like more people being members of more Jewish institutions? And it's leading into the question, which is actually counterintuitively the one that Dan alluded to. It's about your name, Ayin. I love that on your website, you actually explain what Ayin means. There's a lot of organizations that don't say what their Hebrew name means. And you talk about it. You say that one of its meanings, there's a few, but one of its meanings is a spring, like a natural water spring. You would never ask, like, well, is water leading to some other goal? No, water is a human need. So you would never put to the test, like, is water leading to something else? Like on one level, yeah, like me drinking water leads to me being able to function in the world. But that's not how we talk about water. We understand it's a necessity. So I guess my question is like, A, can you give us more on this, what I'm calling a gateway drug situation? Like, how can we not talk about Jewish art? But also, how might it relate to this name you chose that is sort of an ever-flowing spring and is also a few other meanings that you can talk about?
I'll speak to the instrumentalization piece first. The reason for a long time I was an artist outside of the Jewish community was because I didn't find spaces in the Jewish community where it felt like I was getting what I needed as an artist. And that's precisely because art was consistently being pigeonholed towards certain purposes. And if it didn't meet those purposes, then there was no space for it. And that's the death of art. And the death of art is an incredibly serious issue in our community, in our society, because it means failure of imagination and closing off pathways to new understandings and possibilities and arrangements in the world. I will say that, though, I think we should give art as much space as possible to not be doing something. It needs space to just be itself in order to make the most beauty in the world and have the most potential to move and change people. It's also true that making space for art in Jewish spaces brings people to Jewish spaces. That was one of the things that I felt when I first came to Ayin, was like, I need this. I felt alienated from Jewish spaces for a variety of reasons, but partially because I didn't feel the recognition of other artists, of a space where art was celebrated for itself and its value was understood and supported and given space. So if we want to talk about instrumentalizing and trying to bring more Jews in and continuity and all the things that people talk about, art is actually in service of that. But we shouldn't be thinking about it in that way. We should be giving it space. Maybe it's ironic. It's like, it is, we can think about it as an instrument towards more Jewish connection, and we shouldn't be asking it to do that.
In addition to the kind of imposition of instrumentalization that artists can be faced with entering into certain kinds of Jewish spaces, often, for instance, as a musician, and I would imagine this could apply to other mediums as well, the attention to production and presentation of the art was severely lacking, often without professional support of real good sound, or putting music in a room with the worst acoustics at the entire conference or something like this. So there is actually a very practical element of having artists-led production studios and platforms and presses, in that we know actually what different mediums require to be presented at their highest level. And we want that to occur. We're not just checking off a box that says, we invited an artist to a conference and didn't give them anything that they would require for their work to really have impact and succeed. In fact, the sound was so bad, nobody could really make out what the music was. But we had an artist. We're really invested and knowledgeable because of our experience as artists. Like, oh, if we're going to do this, we actually need to do it well. We want the audience to receive an amazing experience, and we want the artists to feel like they're able to express themselves and be received at the highest level of production possibility within the bounds that we're working in. So it's not just a conceptual kind of communal alienation misalignment. There is actually like real practical production knowledge that we as artists in these mediums bring to the production and presentation of other works.
Following up, is there anything you'd add about the name Ayin Press, about the Ayin part?
Me and Tom connected over experimental poetry. That was kind of the fulcrum of our connection, kind of the basis around which our other interests and experiences revolved and evolved, both in the realms of Jewish spirituality and in social justice work and movements. Both of us had keen interest into what I will call letterism approaches to language forms and expression. And there is a tradition both in modern, postmodern art that plays with letter forms as raw materials. And it also, Jewishly especially, but in many cultures, there's a long through line of investigation, experimentation with the aesthetic and magical, let's say, properties of letter forms in and of themselves. So focusing our identity as a creative project within a lettristic realm.
Just to clarify this for people who don't know the Hebrew alphabet, what Eden is getting at is that Ayin is itself a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. So the letristic realm he's talking about with the name is that Ayin Press, it's a press named after one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
It kind of brought together two of our real shared sensibilities that had to do with contemporary experimental art and deep Jewish thought and mysticism.
So I'm going to just dwell in the Ayin even more with you. I've been sitting with Ayin in a bunch of ways. First, if I were to try and define Ayin, I've never really thought about the exercise of like defining each letter, but now I'm thinking about it. I think I would say substantial nothingness, which is a very artsy fartsy. It sounds like I'm trying to be impressive when I say that, but that's just what makes sense to me. What I mean by that is Ayin as a letter, you've talked about some of its associations. Also practically, depending on who you ask, depending on which groups of Jews you ask, it is both a silent letter and a not silent letter. So when I say substantial nothingness, it's nothingness in the sense that it is silent, but there are many groups, especially Mizrahi Jews, who pronounce it not as silent. There's a ayin. There's like a guttural nature to it. Anyway, that's number one. So I think your organization could claim to be like giving voice to the silence, or I don't know, something like that. And also, it means nothing. It means nothing. Like creation yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, is central to the idea of ayin. And so it's a capital N nothing.
I'm particularly drawn to these two poles, or at least apparent poles, that are actually not in opposition as they might appear to be, of somethingness and nothingness, of yesh and ayin. It makes me think of so many things that are relevant and at the heart of the project. I think, ultimately what we're doing, I think at its heart, is visionary, world building, imaginative work. It's work of creation, but also one really important orientation in art is this impulse towards deconstruction or defamiliarization. How do you say something or present something in a way that feels a little bit unrecognizable or strange, or like it doesn't fit? Both because it's beautiful and also because it forces us to reconsider things that we might not consider if it was presented or said or communicated in the way that we're accustomed to. That sort of deconstruction and defamiliarization for me is associated with the nothingness, with the ayin. And so I think there's this almost cycle or circularity. There's something from nothing, but then there's also taking the something and highlighting the nothing within it or turning it back into nothing. And then again, taking what you've sort of deconstructed and building something new from it. And I think there's some beautiful cycle there to create something new and then reconsider it and take it apart and then build it back again. And I think that's a crucial thing that that artists do and that Ayin is trying to do.
So let's talk more about the nitty-gritty of Ayin Press. I'm wondering, we talked a little bit at the top of the show about what you've been doing. I'm curious about what you hope to be doing, how you imagine this growing, and what kinds of things do you imagine doing, where this is all going. And I'm also interested in something that I get asked a lot about what we do, because I feel like our website sort of has the same feel. Like there's lots of different things going on here. And sometimes people will say, well, why don't you pick your lane? And I'll say, well, because nobody else is doing any of the other things that we're trying to do. In a way, I want to ask the question, what is the world that you wish would be out there, whether it's things that you're doing or might do, or things that you probably won't do, but think it would be really important for others to come and do, to create this whole tapestry of artist-driven, Jewish, whatever we want to call it, some of which you'll end up doing and some of which you would encourage others to do.
For us, for Ayin, I think our more immediate to midterm future is we're looking to grow our organization. As boring and practical as that sounds, we're actually trying to create a sustainable practice and platform. And we are, right now behind the scenes cooking a number of new curated column spaces. I mean, we have our annual journal that will continue. We have the folio form, which we launched, which is, I feel, moderately unique. We call them zines or chapbooks for the internet. And, we present curated collections of material. People have multimedia material. People have really responded to that form as a form of digital publishing, kind of as a form itself. So that's an exciting thing. Right now, we have one column space called Speaking from Experience. The contributing editor is a journalist named Madison Margolin,
a past guest,
who is very active in the realm of psychedelics and Jewish culture. And that's right now a column that focuses on psychedelics and the experiential aspect of spiritual life. I don't know. It's kind of a boring answer, I'm realizing, but we want to expand everything we're doing. We want to publish more online. We want to open up this space both in more curated ways and also kind of freer ways. And we're kind of exploring ways to do that from our editorial and design positions. And we're really working on the next 1 to 2 years of book publishing and trying to a big thing for us, because our vision is so kind of vast and multitudinous, kind of as we've discussed, it's really, we're in kind of like a time release reveal. So, if you saw Ayin a year ago, you'd been like, oh, cool, small book publisher with a digital journal. Then you go a year later, you're like, oh, what's this folios and columns thing? And oh, now I thought they published a book by Joe Hammer. Now they're publishing this book by this National Book Award winning iconic American poet, Gerald Stern. Oh, they're doing literature. And then you check back 4 months from now and you'll see a book that we're doing with Shotwell Magid in the political imagination realm. We're working on children's books. We just launched a new children's imprint. We're working on art books and kind of more experimental art publishing forms. So it's, part of it is we have all these visions in our head that we are hoping to work towards and achieve. And then we know there's like a bit of a disconnect when people go to the site and they're only able to see a certain amount of it, even though all of the other stuff is very actively cooking on the stove, in conversation, in contract, in production, and all of this stuff. So we're just really excited to kind of like bring more of that vision that we've been conceptualizing for quite a few years into manifestation and expression, to give a more broad sense of the contours of the project, which, as we've discussed, are kind of ever evolving. Our lane is no lane.
I love the idea of the slow motion reveal, because we, for a long time, said, well, I thought Judaism Unbound was a podcast. We're like, no, it was never a podcast. It was always a larger idea. The first thing that got revealed was a podcast, right? And just like you say. So I very much connect with that. I also just wondering, as we talk about this, who the audience is for all of what you're doing. Is that a way, or is that also all things are possible, because I'm thinking about, in my mind, I may be using the wrong terminology, but I'm thinking in my mind about a distinction between maybe what you could call avant-garde art versus, let's say, edgy popular art versus just regular popular art. I don't know if that's the right terminology. And then what we talked about earlier about, is art an end in itself, or is art a means to achieving something? All of those questions are on the table. I'm just, so fascinated to hear you talk more about all those ideas and how your work relates to them.
I think that it goes back to the idea of world building and de-siloing. And de-siloing is part of is a trick of creative production. Metaphor as a fundamental creative technique is colliding two things that are different from each other. And so we're doing that as a collective intra and intercommunal project where we're actually trying as much as possible to bring things that are, for reasons that we can't go into today, they have been siloed. Spirituality, politics, art is this very simplified form, but that could be parsed into smaller details. And I would even say, like, beyond just like the fun of colliding and creating these kinds of overlapping lenses, it's also goes back to kind of the lived experience of, we're not saying we're an art-driven press, we're artists, we're people who are experiencing life and want to have we want to have the embodied experience, we want to have the cerebral experience, we want to have the spiritual experience, we want different kind of chakras and layers of experience to be honored. And that's why we opened this children's publishing imprint. We want it to be intergenerational. We want it to feel academic. We want it to feel pop. These boundaries are interesting to play with. And that's why we're like, what is the pop version of a scholarly author? What's that pop version? What's the scholarly version of someone who wants to go pop? That's interesting to us, and that's generative. Of course, there's boundaries and it's bounded, but I do think partially also that's the answer to audience. Right now we're an English language press. We're interested in working with, in translation and working with other language contexts. But I think it goes back and kind of to the DNA of the project, which is, what does it mean for like the kind of these sort of labels, which are really, we're not the people right now to problematize that, but thank God for, Judaism Unbound and other projects like this, is that, the secular versus the religious, the different denominations within the spectrum of Judaism as religious. Like, these are all things that are not so straightforward, that the fixity is, I think, coming back to the looseness of how artists create. You look at a painter studio of any great painter, it looks like you're in, chaos. And from chaos comes expression, and we need to hold that as as ethically and as humanly and as as possible, so that from chaos comes really important work that changes people's lives and makes people live better and in right relation to the problems of our time. We're interested in what it means to bridge audiences. We're interested in the question of like, how do we get more traditional religious quote unquote readers to come to Ayin, and people who are interested in political stuff to come to Ayin and to be, I have the moment of recognition, and then be like, whoa, that piece was not written for me necessarily, but it is written for you because we housed it in this space. We want that kind of prismatic experience, and we might alienate people. It's not like, I do think that there's limitations to how you scale in this way in the kind of, that's why I brought up complexity earlier, which is like, you're on social media. If you're a one note thing, you actually can move faster. But it's okay if someone comes and they get alienated by something that they didn't expect or defamiliarized. Hopefully they come back one day. We want to invite people to the messy desk with us.
I was thinking about this question with respect to us and also with respect to you as I prepped for this episode. But what you just said about how, somebody could be looking from a vantage point of art and like, whoops, I found politics. Or somebody could be coming from the place of spirituality and like, oop, I found art. Like, I spend a lot of time imagining digital Jewish everything as a space. And I think about weird questions like, if Judaism Unbound is a space in the digital Jewish city, like what intersection are we at? And I mean that like think about that literally. Like, it sounds like what you just described, Tom, is you're at the intersection of Jewish art street, Jewish politics street, and Jewish spirituality street. It's one of those like weird intersections where there's more than two streets hitting each other. You've got an awkward bunch of stoplights, and so people get confused, and like hopefully there's not too many traffic accidents. You're sort of a 5-pointed or 6-pointed intersection as opposed to a normal like a 4-pointed. I think we're similar to that, by the way. I think we've got a lot of streets that are sort of hitting Judaism Unbound roundabout. We're probably a roundabout. We're probably like going in a circle and then branching off into different things.
I think this is a good one, Lex. We got to take this metaphor further.
Yeah, no, I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about this because I think it's helpful. And I encourage other people out there to think about like, what are your intersections and like what new neighborhoods could you try to explore? What's adjacent to what, et cetera. But like the question I have also relates to the digital side of your work, because there was a moment earlier where one of you spoke about how because you have this digital arm, you can have things that are not just text and still images. You can also have, video incorporated, sound incorporated. That's the strength of digital stuff. There's a lot of strengths of digital Jewish production, creativity, etc. Another strength is, I don't have a casual or weird way to say this, but like it's conducive to just trying shit out. If you want to just have a day where offline, you're just going to throw something together and release it to the world. You have to invest in the printing costs. Like if you're creating something that's visual or written, like you have to deal with printing. You have to figure out, where you're going to circulate it geographically, physically. You have to probably advertise, whatever. Like there's a lot of different pieces. Whereas if you want to just try shit out online, you just put it there and then tell people it's there. And like, obviously it's a little more complicated than that, but there's a way in which stuff that we do as Judaism Unbound, like we're just like, we'll do a Purim event. We're not sure exactly what it is. We're just going to do it. Like if we were going to rent a space, if we were going to do all the steps to do that offline, it would be a whole Megillah. I'm talking about Purim events. I did that on purpose. Online, it's not that much of a Megillah. It's just like you launch it and people hopefully come. But even if they don't, like you tried it, it's there, it's gone. Like, I guess I'd love to hear from you. Is that sort of philosophically part of who you are? It feels to me like it is, because it's like, we'll do folios. Great. We'll do a journal. Great. You've got a great section of your website that's devoted to making up new words. Like truly all of it's there. And I'm curious, like, to hear a little bit philosophically from you, if that's like part of your DNA as an organization as we close.
Yes, the digital is an experimental space, and it allows a looseness that's totally in Ayin's DNA and core to what we're doing. And I think one of the things that also is really special about what we're doing is all of the care that goes into the design of the digital. Because I think one thing that happens for artists who put their work online is sometimes there's not a really deep aesthetic amount of thought and effort and care that goes into presenting it in a way that feels like it reflects the nature of the work itself. And we put a lot of work in and a lot of, making the digital space feel like a gallery, feel like you're actually reading a physical book. So I think that yes, to the looseness, and also we're bringing something new, something special in the way that we bring care to the design and the materiality of the digital space.
Lex, what you're describing about a certain looseness and room for experiment and kind of like accessibility to presentation that you find within the digital sphere, we certainly share that. I think for our project, we kind of yes and that. We maintain that space, grow that space, play in that space, see it as such. And then we also relate it in a complementary way to our print publishing practice. And those just have different time frames. Those have different life cycles. Those have different processes and sensibilities, but we do see them. And that this was also part of the inception of the project, was how to relate the creative processes that are present within the digital realm and within the print realm, and how to get them to be complementary within the greater umbrella, under the greater umbrella of our project itself. So we really do see the digital space both as an end in and of itself to be able to present different kinds of material, as well as a place to really try things out, work with different artists and authors, try different ideas, and see what is basically transferable into the print sphere, which then extends the life and process of a project and kind of takes it into a different realm. But like you're saying, like print and all of that kind of stuff, it's so labor intensive. But we've created a container, kind of multi-roomed house or whatever, within which we can kind of like cook ideas, try new things out, work with different people, see how it goes. And then we have this other branch of the project within which we can say, okay, now we're really going to like commit to a very specific project and take it all the way into a different form of manifestation that requires a different time scale and level of investment and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would just say that it's rooted in Ayin, the symbol, the brand, the identity, that it's the starting point is an image, it's a letter, it's a word, it's many words, it has many meanings, it means nothing. And it also, it starts with a letter, you create words, and then the idea that is like in this accordion style thing, we're not just interested in 250 pages of those words. We're also interested in a piece that has no words, or a piece that has a single word. We are, as a Jewish publishing practice, interested in the idea of the book in the most expanded sense, and the idea of writing in the most expanded sense. I mean, everything potentially can be construed as a writing experience and as a way of making a mark that could be legible to people. We want Ayin to be this really authentically situated and grounded space to just point at the entire continuum of textual expression, from the nonverbal to the fully verbalized and verbose and prosaic, and then the poetic in between. It's something that I think is an approach to kind of like a unified theory of Jewish textuality. If you're just, and I have less experience, if you're just in a certain space that cares about a certain kind of old text, it might exclude oral Torah. If you're just in an art space, it might exclude all of that, So we want it to be just like radically inclusive. It would be inauthentic for us, and I think intellectually lazy for us, to not publish digital art and digital works and be engaging with mediums that are beyond the book. And it would also be lazy for us to forget the book, which has been the most politicized object for textuality that I can think of right now. So that expansiveness, that accordion.
Accordion being a reference to something that we were sending messages to each other about in our Zoom chat during the recording. Accordion and Ayin merged together. The idea of accordion as a musical instrument and Ayin the press. Accordion.
That accordion is really important to play, and to play really weird notes and also normal chords sometimes.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having us.
So fun.
This was absolutely very fun. We hope that all of you out there enjoyed listening to this as much as we enjoyed participating in the conversation. And before we close out entirely, we want to encourage you to go to Ayin Press's website. That's AYIN press.org. You can check out all of the things that we mentioned on this episode in terms of their digital creations. You can learn about their print creations. And you can also check out a bunch of things that we didn't get the chance to get to in this episode, because like we said, they have so many different creations on their site. So definitely check that out. We also want to encourage you, check out our website, judaismunbound.com. We've got Hanukkah gift possibilities for you to check out and get your loved ones or yourself. You can love yourself, so you're your own loved one, and get yourself a great gift. We've got our On Yeshiva courses that are already in the works, but you can sign up a little late and catch up via video recording, like Dan mentioned at the top. All of that is at judaismunbound.com. The On Yeshiva part is at judaismunbound.com/classes. So we're going to close out in the way we always do by encouraging you to be in touch with us, and there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, there's our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. All of those are at Judaism Unbound for our handles. There's our email addresses. You can always send questions, comments, thoughts, hot takes to dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. And of course, as the year 2022 nears its close, we hope that you will consider us for a year-end donation, which you can do at judaismunbound.com/donate on either a monthly recurring basis or just as a one-time gift. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.